Welcome to the third season of That's So Second Millennium, the Catholic Science podcast where we explore the fascinating borderlands between science and theology through realms of philosophy, human experience, and more. Welcome back to That's So Second Millennium, episode 102. We actually talk a lot in this episode about autism. Bill questions me about it. We both talk about its fairly vague definition, some alternative approaches you can take to it, whether it has to do with sensory sensitivity, which might be more genetic, might not always have to be genetic, or whether it could really be based on things like trauma. We don't know. We're not experts in the field, but I definitely discuss some of my personal experiences with different kinds of trauma, different levels of degrees of it and sequences of it. So we open that discussion up and related to the context of what we were talking about with the COVID plague that we're going through, and isolation, social isolation, and mental isolation. So, all right, hope you enjoy it. This is the part 3 of our conversation. So hopefully in early June, we'll be back with you with an interview from Bill.
The subject of autism came up, and as you know, it's something that you and I have discussed in the past.
A little bit,
and
yeah.
A little bit. Maybe it's a rich topic for all sorts of reasons, not the least of which being that it does seem, from a layman's position like mine, that it's defined in so many broad ways now, and it's used very lightly and blithely to describe all sorts of things. And there's the autism spectrum and all, and everybody wants to be respectful of it. Lord knows I want to be respectful of it, because I see it as a kind of modern day ADD phenomenon, where if ADD and ADHD had been more fully diagnosed 20, 30, 40 years ago, I think some aspect of my life and many other lives might have been changed in some way. But today it's autism. So what you folks didn't really talk about it in the podcast too much. But is there do you kind of see a middle ground where autism can be more and should be more narrowly defined rather than the kind of very general perspective that people have?
I don't know enough about it to even want to have an opinion about that. I mean, I've read a little bit about it. So I look at, I looked at, for a while, a couple of years ago, I was investigating the question of whether I had some degree of it. And it would be, it's like any sort of mental disorder. They blur off into each other. We want to have names because names help us work with the concepts.
Right.
Concepts, a concept is but we have to recognize that, things shade off into each other. So if you read John Ratey, for example, popular psychologist, who talks a lot about how our sensory apparatus affects our mental health and our ability to function in the world. He zeroes in a lot on the aspect of autism that, things that who can be to some degree hypersensitive to things, and that causes us to shut down and to avoid taking in input from the outside world.
Yes,
but there's an awful lot of other aspects to it, and so you think about that. Okay, so think about that for a moment, and then shift your eyes over to suppose you've again, totally hypothetical example. Suppose that you have a kid who has been exposed to a really violent event. Some horrible, bloody accident happened to, let's say his sibling, for example. And, and then he sort of, what are natural reactions to trauma? Withdrawal and anxiety and trying to avoid, dangerous situations. And of course, what does a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old child know? Noise probably symbolizes a dangerous situation, just like our pets would, react with a startle response to loud noises. Yeah. So I had that experience. Of course, I've talked about it before, and it's not a secret. But And I'm just now realizing standing here talking about loud noises. So I mentioned earlier today that they tore down my rural public school. They tore it down after my 5th grade year. So my 5th grade year, the way the school, it was this big square building that had been built to be 1st through 12th grade. And so it had a nice big gymnasium and a beautiful stage. And then it had, it had a study hall. And so, so the way things were divided up in my day, it was K through 8. So kindergarten was down in the basement, down in the beautiful concrete basement. And then you went up a floor to the 1st floor for 1st through 4th grade. Maybe 2nd through 4th grade, maybe 1st grade, you were still down in the basement. And then 5th grade, 5th through 8th grade, you got to be up in the sort of upper story, which was, was it above the gymnasium even? So you had the study hall, and you had 4 classrooms off the study hall. And that was when you'd made it, man. You were, you were the big kids now. So I got 1 year of that. And so in one of those rooms off the study hall, I mean, things were just, it was the last year. They apparently the school board, had decided, basically made it clear they were going to close the school after, May 1990 or whatever it was. And so they were just, there was stuff that was just not being maintained. And so I remember, I think it was my math classroom. The chalkboard had just, the chalkboards were leaning away from the wall. The gorgeous old slate chalkboards were just like no longer really attached. And one of them just fell, finished falling and, crashed to the ground directly behind my chair.
Oh my.
One day in 5th grade. I'm like, and I've already been through this previous experience. And I'm like, that probably didn't help anything. That probably didn't help anything either. Because I'd say to people for years afterwards that I have this exaggerated startle response because of that. I'm like, well, and of course now with, decades more insight, that was probably not the beginning. That was just part of it. Yeah.
Right. But still worth noting, because there really is that mix of nature and nurture.
Yeah.
And,
so what is autism? Is it solely genetic, or can it be induced? I guess that's an aspect of the question I'm trying to raise here. I don't know.
Right.
I couldn't imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's an endlessly interesting topic, and we in society we tend to make everything either totally binary. They have autism or they don't have autism, or
right.
It's defined this way.
You got to cross a line, and then you have this diagnosis. Whereas really, it's it would be more like, well, your problem is probably about 40% trauma, and maybe it's 30% autism, and then it's 30%, this other, thing that's going on, be it genetic or some influence in your life that's really not, that's let's say something from Darsha Narvez's spectrum of,
right, which is equally, if not superbly, compatible with all of those other things. I mean, it's equally important.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but frustrating. But all the more reason for podcasts like this and explorations like this of how science and religion and faith and reason and all of these things have to come together to understand such a complex universe.
Yeah,
it's really interesting. But go ahead. What were some of the things that you wanted to talk about?
Well, at this point, I mean, it's almost 10 after 1. So
I can go another. Hit me with 1 or 2.
Okay. I mean, and the other thing about it is I'd really actually like you to read that article. Like, it's the cover article from Notre Dame magazine, from the spring 2020 Notre Dame magazine.
Okay.
Do you have that around? I mean,
probably it's probably in that same
online.
kind of stack. Oh yeah, and that it will be online. Yes.
Yeah. But the longshoreman and the newspaperman, I would be fascinated to get your take on that article.
Really?
And talk about and to talk about, because of course I can talk about it from the perspective of, the messy sausage making business of academia and employment in academia. And I think I think it'd be interesting to see what happens when we bring all those insights together and talk about, of course, the longshoreman side of it, manufacturing or moving or other, manual labor jobs being outsourced or automatized, versus, and even intellectual jobs like, journalism, either the field just changing completely. And even some of that can be automatized. It's just something surfs around and picks up links, and an algorithm says, "Oh, this Facebook user only wants to hear things from this side of the ideological spectrum, so that's what I'll feed it." And then and then the just blunderous, exploitative, and the embarrassing thing is for all of us with PhDs, like we have a PhD. And we're letting ourselves be exploited. We should be smarter than this, but we're not.
Yeah.
It's really kind of embarrassing. I mean, I think that's fundamentally part of it. It's embarrassing. And of course, why do we stay in school so long? Well, we don't necessarily know what else to do with our lives.
Well, that's part of it, and also the same educational system in K through 12 that's still basically a remnant of the kind of manufacturing oriented assembly line way,
or at least corporate, right? I mean, you go through
definitely corporate.
You get your high school diploma, and then you go to work, typing or something for the man, inside this massive, vertical conglomerate.
Right, and that extends straight through to PhD education. Even though there's supposedly a whole lot, there is a whole lot more individuality celebrated.
There is, and
part of the learning process.
That's almost worse in some ways because
interesting.
Because the individual, the people who've partly because they've done the work, partly because they won a number of lotteries in terms of coming at life with the ability to actually take a step back and say, what am I going to need to do to succeed at this game? Because it is a game.
It is, yeah.
And then but a lot, winning all of those lotteries, and then developing those skills, because of course you unquestionably have to do the work. That, once you have that knowledge, you then need to act on that knowledge. Knowledge by itself never gave us power. That's another 12-step saying. But if you've acted on it, there's still no guarantee whatsoever that you're going to be a good manager, and you have to be a manager.
Yeah.
And then the whole fact that PhD students are just exploitable, cheap labor.
Right.
And to a lesser extent, postdocs are exploitable, cheap labor.
Right.
With you make no promises to, and you say goodbye to them, and they're they're working for far less than what their earning potential is elsewhere in the economy, which that's that's not a monolithic good thing either. That's it's you can't get very far before you have to start answering questions about all sorts of strange things about how people value things, which is what drives an economy. What do we value, and what are we willing to work for? Yeah, it gets very, very basic, and again, it's just like Hilaire Belloc said. We have all these practical people wandering around who believe they have solutions, but they haven't really thought through to first principles or final consequences.
Right. Yeah.
They may think they have, but they have not gone very far. They've only gone a layer or two deep, and they've taken everything else for granted as it just has to be this way.
Yeah, that's right. Another reason for discussions like these to not only ask better questions, but to ask questions that extend across a whole chronology, that look at the backstory, the full context, where things are leading, what are the consequences of something. And journalists are just horrible at doing that. You can see that simply by how everything is framed in the context of breaking news on TV news, and so where is that?
What crashed? What caught fire today?
Right, that's it. Right. So there's no context, and we're discouraged from thinking of first principles or consequences or. Yeah, it's really just quite a limited learning world, and I'm wondering whether this COVID experience might help us to be a little bit more probing of as we rebuild the economy, what can go and what should be kept, and how has this feature treated us in the past 20 years, and should we reshape it now while we have
has it
the
been earning
chance?
its keep, or
Has
should
it
we?
been earning its keep? Exactly.
Is it? Should we not waste a crisis? I don't know if that was Lyndon Johnson or who said that, but never waste a good crisis, which of course can be used in terrible, terrible ways. But
that's right. Yeah, and I think it's mostly the lingo of activists, and it's mostly political lingo nowadays. I can see the wisdom of it, but yeah, usually crises are weaponized now rather than used as a learning experience, as an epiphany, as a true crossroads. It's more just as the latest battle to be won between wordsmiths spinning different memes and sound bites. We are very much trapped in that kind of mind frame as a society. I'm hoping that this experience, the COVID experience, it could free us a little bit from that as we learn to appreciate people and human community more, and how complex human beings are. But so we've been boiled down to the essentials in these past 4 to 6
I mean,
weeks.
what we're doing has been very, very utilitarian, and I mean, I think we even mentioned it last month that how could you possibly grapple with the question of what the relative costs are? I saw an article online that tried to take a very crude hack at it. Of course you have to put a dollar figure on human lives at some point.
Wow.
Well, you don't have to. There are other ways of looking at it, but that's,
I would hope so.
That's certainly the I mean, at some point you're weighing human lives against human lives, at least, and trying to pull out every last one of the the people who die by suicide or domestic violence, or because of lack of access to something.
Yes. Just even being able to attend 12-step meetings and all these things. It's how limited have we made ourselves, even without worrying about the nitty-gritty paychecks of the economy. We're locking ourselves into very limited ways of thinking, and all at the motivation of science. Like you were saying, science is not properly prescriptive, but in absence of anything else, we have allowed it to become prescriptive. And science is wonderful, but it can only take into account so many variables, and it can't take into account the human nature variables.
Right. I mean, it's its own form of logic. It's a procedure that depends on logic, and like we were saying earlier, logic has no internal. If you know where you want to go, logic can get you there, or at least it can do a lot to get you there. But like you're saying, it has no prescriptive value. But we're trying to shove prescriptive value on science because it's the only thing we trust now.
It's what exactly,
and science refuses. And so what we're really doing, we're really doing is just going at it with extremely half-baked, utilitarian philosophy.
Right.
Some and horrendous numbers of unthought assumptions, and just sort of brute cultural drift, if I may coin a phrase, I suppose.
I love that. Yeah.
That's just what we've all sort of. I mean, we just sort of look at each other and and have sort of intuited. Well, this is what I'm allowed to say, and this is what I'm allowed to say that I value.
Right.
And it's not, and it's just drifting. It just drifts.
Yeah. We kind of deem ourselves fortunate that at least science has given us something that we can do, that we can call virtuous and constructive, and the statistics do show that. Thank God, hospital admissions are going down, and deaths are going down and stuff. So by gosh, science must be doing a darn good job, and we're proud. We're part of it, and so we're pretty darn good too. but we can't afford to let that be a closed loop of self-affirmation between us and science.
Right. I mean, and it's not to say that that governments have made all their decisions badly about this.
No,
I mean,
exactly
the desire to
right.
save lives is, of course, virtuous. And if we've taken this action, and certainly the good thing about science infusing, there are people keeping track of this. There are people who are learning, at least, from that epidemiological standpoint, okay, this happened. And there are already people gathering information to do studies of the psychology and sociology of what happened here.
You're right. Yes, that's going to be very exciting, actually.
But for those to reach their full potential, they need to be married to an anthropology, an idea of what the human person is for, and some idea of what is actually valuable.
Yes,
and some sort of hierarchy of values that cannot come. It can be informed by. It can be, you could have a hierarchy of values. You can't just construct an arbitrary hierarchy of values.
Right.
That can be an arbitrary hierarchy of values can be thwarted by actually doing the science of observing how human beings actually behave.
Right.
But you can't construct a hierarchy of value. I mean, if you're constructing a hierarchy of values just from your psychological and sociological studies, you are assuming utilitarianism or something. You're assuming something because you're judging something.
Yeah.
You're making that judgment whether you let yourself see it or not.
So the Catholic Church and others with values that appeal to the common good and to things that are akin to human dignity in the individual, we're going to have to be ready at the top of our game, at the top of our intellectual game, and ready to be conversant in the public square once these results start coming in from these studies you're mentioning, where in a kind of univocal secular kind of way, they're going to say, well, clearly we learned this, and this about human nature from the COVID experience, but they're not going to incorporate the whole picture, and someone's got to incorporate, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story.
The rest of the story, yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating. Well, all the more reason for podcasts like this to continue. I keep promoting our podcast, at least to us.
At least us. Exactly.
I probably should promote it more widely, but I do. But
if someone is already listening, then we're grateful that you're already listening.
Amen. The promotion has
tell
worked.
1 or 2 other people. We would really appreciate that. And if you have feedback about stuff that you would rather us do or do differently, by all means, send it to us. But
yeah. Well, it's always a pleasure talking with you, Paul. And I know you're very busy these days, and
so are you, aren't we all?
Oh my!
Being under Satan's yoke. No, that is part of the subject of my conversation between my loving parent and my inner child today. Was about, I really do, I just keep trying to convince myself that I have to do more than I can possibly do in a day, and it's not true. It's just not
right.
True.
Yep. No, it's right. We have to treat ourselves with the same kind of love and dignity that we believe God is giving us. God has given us. Well, so the story continues.
The story continues. That can be my personal message to you, dear listener, from this Divine Mercy Sunday, whenever you're actually getting the chance to listen to this, but it's recorded on Divine Mercy Sunday. So
yes, and when we when we consider the battle for science and religion and all of these other things, and the tendency to be both relativist and moralist, we have to remember the need for mercy as a component in our everyday lives. Whether we believe it's the God is the source or some some wisdom intrinsic to us, it's a beautiful wisdom, one that I appreciate.
It is true. It is true. Thanks for listening to this episode of That's So Second Millennium. TSSM's audio producer is Morgan Burkhardt. Our theme music, Igneous Grok, was composed and performed by Vin Marquardt. For my co-host Bill Schmidt, I'm Paul Giesting. Until next time.